Back in the 1960s, when Playboy magazine was in its first decade, people actually did buy it for the articles. The reason was that Playboy at the time was pushing all sorts of boundaries. Some of the great thinkers of the time wrote specifically for that magazine in order to kind of stretch the envelope a little bit. For example, Harvard theologian Harvey Cox wrote an article called "For Christ's Sake," challenging people to think of Jesus in a new way, and Playboy printed that. The article created an uproar. Thousands of people wrote in and complained. But ironically, it was not the article itself which received the most criticisms, it was the picture next to it. The picture was a charcoal drawing of Jesus laughing. This picture. It is interesting to me that of all the images in Playboy magazine, the most controversial was Jesus laughing. Why? Because Jesus isn't supposed to laugh. Being the Son of God is serious business, said one letter to the editor. And what's really funny to me is that of all the letters and all the questions that they raised and the plausibility of Jesus laughing, not one mentioned the plausibility of someone being born in Galilee having light skin and straight hair when everyone else there had dark skin and nappy hair. But the answer is obvious. We want Jesus to look like us, and we don't laugh, at least not when we go to church. Being religious is serious business. Two great sages speak to this. The first, Voltaire, who said in the mid-1700s, "God is a comedian playing to an audience too afraid to laugh." The second comes from 14th century Sufi poet Hafez. "I have 1,000 brilliant lies," he says, "for the question, 'How are you?' And I have 1,000 brilliant lies for the question, 'What is God?'" If you think that the truth can be known from words, if you think that the sun and the ocean can pass through that tiny opening called the mouth, oh, someone should start laughing. Someone should start wildly laughing now. Now, a story about church and people too afraid to laugh. It begins one evening about 15 years ago in my church in Atlanta. At a meeting held in the sanctuary, one that we had just built after growing very rapidly, 6 youth, a youth advisor, and I sat in a circle discussing the upcoming youth service. The mood was rather austere. Most of the youth smiled as they came in. I knew that they liked me, but it was still the kind of smile that most young people save for their minister, sort of like for their principal. Laughter could be heard through the double doors in the fellowship hall right next door, where a rousing potluck was being held. But our little gathering had the tone of a much more serious and somber moment. Much too serious, I thought, on hindsight. We'd only gone far enough to plan the working title of the service, which ironically was, "Where Has the Laughter Gone?" It had been a very hard year for the youth group and the church. A conflict broke out earlier in the year during a youth retreat. And on the weekend of the retreat, a couple teens, in a fit of curiosity and playfulness, got caught in a little mischief and misunderstanding, and a few tenets of the covenant were broken. There were hurt feelings. It happens. What doesn't always happen, though, is repair and reconciliation. A couple of very prominent youth stopped coming, largely because their parents, even less inclined toward reconciliation, stopped coming, and they couldn't be coaxed to return. For many years prior to that moment, the youth group had been legendary in this congregation for being one of the funnest and the funniest groups in the church. Indeed, in the whole district, middle schoolers could not wait till they were old enough to join the youth group. And so when these particular middle schoolers finally made the leap, the youth group there was a great disillusionment when the first thing that they encountered was hurt instead of laughter. The advisors and the parents took it all very seriously, and for a while there was a lot of tension. Time was spent unpacking all the feelings that had come up and were difficult to let go. There was sadness and betrayal and disillusionment, but for those who stayed and helped unpack and process, there were epiphanies, there were tears, there was some grief, all of which gave way to understanding and apologies and eventually forgiveness and acceptance. But it was hard work, and for much of the year, for much of the group, the hardest thing to recover, the only thing that they missed really, was the laughter. For a long time, after so many sad and serious emotions and after so many conversations, it was as if no one dared to laugh, as though laughter would betray all of the seriousness of everything that we had just gone through. Even after the hurt was gone, the solemnity lingered, and it lingered with the youth and with the parents and with the general membership and even with the minister. But as we began planning that worship service, I could see just the faintest hint of that laughter and that joy beginning to bubble up again. It was being held back, to be sure, but it was there, inescapable, that certain sweet silliness, that familiar twinkle in their eyes had begun to creep back in place. But they couldn't quite trust it. At least not in church, not yet. So they kept all their laughter bottled up. Writer Anne Lamott calls laughter carbonated holiness. And that evening, that's what we had in the sanctuary. 7 bottles of carbonated holiness. Everyone had their lids screwed on tight, to be sure, but things were about to get shaken up. The chance for which everyone had been waiting, for some of that fizzy, sticky holiness to escape. The moment arrived when 6 children, ages 3 to 7, came running into the sanctuary through the big double doors from the potluck. They were laughing and carrying balloons and running full steam right past us, and no one in that meeting said a word. The children's laughter disrupted the austere and serious mood of our planning, and I felt everyone look at me wondering what I would do, which for a second was nothing. It wasn't until later I realized the incredible irony of that situation. We were trying to plan a service on the topic of where the laughter had gone, and we were interrupted by children laughing. And I knew in that moment it was God who was laughing. It was God who was wildly laughing, and the joke was on me and on all of us. They say that if you ever want to make God laugh, tell her your plans. Tell her what you think should be happening. And then listen for the thunderous bemusement and applause, as if she is looking down saying, "Really? Really? That's your plan? Okay, wait. Take a little bit of this and a little bit of that you have and some of this over here, and now, again, tell me what your plan is." So there we were, so serious, watching children run around like carbonated holiness, God laughing all the way, and then it happened. The thing that got my attention, and I expect God's attention too. One of the youth who was helping to plan the service got up from the circle that we were in, walked over to the balloon waving children, got her younger sister's attention, and calmly told her younger sister to get the rest of the children under control. And then the younger sister got all the children one by one to line up behind her, and with giggles fully suppressed, they marched back out of the sanctuary and into the fellowship hall. And then, walking back to our group, the young woman turned to me and said in a rather proud and reassuring tone that she has a way with children. And I was stunned. The comment that she made was obviously made for my sake, and I was left wondering, what was that way with children that we were teaching in this church? Was that the expectation that I was giving off? Put a lid on all of that carbonated holiness in the church so that it doesn't interrupt all of our precious seriousness? If so, it was enough to get God to stop laughing. I have 1,000 brilliant lies, says Hafez, for the question, how are you? And I have 1,000 brilliant lies for the question, what is God? But if you think that the truth can be known from words, and if you think that the sun and the ocean can pass through that tiny opening called the mouth, oh, someone should start laughing. Someone should start wildly laughing now. Interesting statistic. Social scientists report that the average child between the age of 2 and 4 laughs on average 400 times a day. The average adult, 18 times a day. The average adult in COVID, this is just my own statistic, probably 5 or 6 at the most. Somewhere along the way to adulthood, we lost our sense of humor. And I think this is something religiously and theologically significant. Enough, anyway, that it was worthy of being described in the very first book of the Bible. Consider Genesis, chapter 18, verses 1 through 15, and chapter 21, verses 1 through 4, which talks about Abraham and Sarah's reaction to God's sense of humor. The Lord appeared to Abraham by the oaks of Mamre as Abraham sat at the entrance of his tent in the heat of the day. Abraham looked up and saw the Lord standing near him, and when he saw him, he ran from the tent entrance to meet him and bowed down to the ground. Abraham said, "My Lord, if I find favor with you, do not pass by your servant." The Lord said to him, "Where is your wife Sarah?" And Abraham said, "There in the tent." Then the Lord said, "I will surely return to you in due season, and your wife Sarah shall bore a son." And Sarah was listening at the tent entrance behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in age. It had ceased to be with Sarah the manner of women. I want to repeat that line just because I get a real kick out of that. It had ceased to be with Sarah the manner of women. So when God says, when she heard God say that, So when she heard God say this, Sarah laughed to herself, saying, "After I have grown old, after my husband is old, then I shall have pleasure?" Then God asked Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh? Is anything too wonderful for the Lord?" But Sarah denied her part, saying, "I did not laugh," for she was afraid. And God said, "Oh, yes, you did so laugh." The Lord dealt with Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had promised. Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age, and Abraham gave to his son the name Isaac, or Isaac, which means he laughs. The word religion is from the Latin meaning again, legion or ligari, as in ligament, means to bind together. To bind together again, to take what is broken and make it whole. They say that at the heart of religion is paradox, the simultaneous brokenness and juxtaposition of two incongruent truths, things like birth and death, love and fear, hope and despair. It is also said that at the heart of humor is paradox, two ideas so radically different in our brain that they can't be fit together in the same thought. Our brain becomes like that tiny car out of which emerges 1,000 clowns, each one defying logic or reason, running around and bumping into the other ones like Keystone Cops. And they squirt our brain with seltzer water until we just have to laugh. Carbonated holiness. So if religion is about paradox and humor is about paradox, and both of these are under the dominion of God, then it must be a God who laughs. A God who says, take this and then bring it together with this over here, and then add this, and then tell me again about your plans. It's a God who says, this joke is on you, but who will also say, I love this joke, and I hope you love this joke too. If children laugh 400 times a day, and we adults only laugh 18 at the most, then we have only 5% of the laughter our children have. Surrendering our innocence for vigilance, we have lost resiliency required for laughter. With only 5% of the laughter our children have, we need to lighten up. For they say, angels fly only because they are able to take themselves lightly. If we have only 5% of the laughter our children have, it is about time that we start letting them teach us about religion rather than always expecting it to be the other way around. And that is my philosophy of religious education in our congregations. In a world with shootings, where children die, with trauma and tragedy of every kind, we need to let go of the audacity that wisdom travels only in one direction, from older to younger. If we are going to be a relevant religion in the 21st century, we need to reclaim some of that lost laughter, which means we need to start consulting some of the resident prophets of carbonated holiness in our midst. It is our only hope of taking seriously a God who laughs. I have heard many people over the years saying that they are afraid to teach because they would miss worship or the sermons. But I have to tell you that the best sermons I have ever heard in church were reliably delivered by 3-foot sages in the children's classroom every Sunday. And if you're listening to this thinking that your religious education days are behind you and you are too old to be with children, it has ceased to be with you the manner of women. I want you to think again. Remember the question Sarah asked God, now that I am old, you expect me to have pleasure? That's exactly what we expect, or at least what we hope. Because a God who laughs is not just for the young to follow. She is a God to whom we all wish to be true, and from whom, at the end of our days, we wish to hear say to us, "Oh, yes, you did so laugh." And we want it to be our church that teaches us that such miracles are possible. So let me close with this postscript. The young people who carried out that service that year in Atlanta did not let the laughter die. They did end up creating a service with much laughter. We all ended up doing a comical interpretive dance where I got to wear a wig and be the fairy godfather. About a story that included resolving what happened to the laughter, where we concluded that it never left. It was never beyond reach, not even for the stodgiest curmudgeon among us. It just sometimes takes a special vantage point. It sometimes just takes children to see it and lift it up so that it points the way to the glory of life. Let us join together and sing our closing hymn, led by Jay and Jessica, "Soon the Day Will Arrive."
Soon the day will arrive when we will be together, and no longer will we live in fear. And the children will smile without wondering whether on that day thunderclouds will appear. Wait and see what a world there can be if we share, if we care, you and me. Wait and see what a world there can be if we share, if we care, you and me. Some have dreamed, some have died to make a bright tomorrow, and our vision remains in our hearts. Now the torch must be passed with the hope, not in sorrow, and
Please join with me in reciting these words to extinguish our chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
Magic and the paradox and the incongruity that are part of the mystery of being alive. And as we end this time of our worship and prepare for this courageous conversation on what we would most wish for our children in religious education program, take a moment to uncork that container of carbonated holiness within you and let it reveal a world where we live and instead of but to but. And may this conversation be a time of great listening and maybe even great laughter. So let us welcome our fantastic Director of Religious Education, Sean Snavely.